Mitch, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this very, very important event focused on ocean health. My name is Doug Heskey, and I'd like to extend our gratitude to Ashley Briscoe and to the accomplished group of speakers that have gathered here today for the first in a series of impact events focused on ocean health and water. There are a few things that are as important in the health of our oceans regulate the Earth's temperatures, and as is the case for the Southern Ocean, it is one of the most important carbon sinks on the planet. It's also potentially one of the greatest environmental catastrophes that nobody is talking about today. So why are we here? The audience today is made up of individuals and institutions that care. They are marine scientists. Many of them are family offices. They are individuals that are ocean advocates, and they are investors that deploy capital into ocean initiatives that will potentially make long-lasting and enduring change. But they are not enough. The blue carbon space and economy is vastly underfunded today to the tune of approximately $149 billion every year. And we're here to change that. Newday is an institutional asset management organization focused on assisting individuals and institutions in deploying capital in publicly traded companies that are a part of 6 core investment funds and impact pillars: air, water, soil, biodiversity, equity, and carbon. At the core of our mission, we are here to assist individuals who want to align the values that they care most about with their financial and investment strategy and do it in an incredibly authentic, transparent, and non-greenwashed way. But we are much more than an institutional asset management organization. We are an amplifier of the on-the-ground impact work that our impact partners pursue. We are a collaborator and do our best to build communities who want to have impact. We are intentionally building movements with the hope that mission-aligned individuals and institutions will join this fight with us. Newday manages an award-winning impact exchange-traded fund, or ETF, that trades under the symbol AHOY on the New York Stock Exchange. The fund was recognized last year as the second most impactful fund out of a very long list of other impact funds. The fund is also directly tied to the Southern Oceans program in multiple ways that we're going to discuss today. First, the fund's constituents are directly tied to the programmatic work that we do with our partners. Number two, Newday is an active manager, and we are engaging directly with the public companies on their policies and practices, particularly related to the Southern Oceans program that we'll be discussing here shortly. And finally, we deploy our own capital back into these initiatives with the goal that we can change our partners in building market-based solutions that are fully sustainable. We also understand that deploying capital is only part of the solution. Public capital, private capital, and charitable capital are all critically important, but marrying institutional and consumer behavior with that is essential. Today, we will unpack a bit more about this work that we pursue with our partners at Earth Echo International, Antarctic 2020, and a whole host of other organizations that have come together to address one of the most important challenges of our time. Now is the time, as the health of the Southern Ocean is in peril, and overfishing or overharvesting of this keystone species, krill, has put the Southern Ocean ecosystem at risk. Krill, a foundational food source for marine mammals and other species, are suffering. And we as human beings are consuming them, that tiny little crustacean, in the form of super omega-3 krill-based nutraceuticals, and using them in the industrial additive process for livestock feed, aquaculture feed, and pet food. It is expected that harvesting of krill could grow 8 times over the next 15 years, driven primarily by these aforementioned activities. And of equal importance, advancing the efforts to create new marine protected areas has stalled. We know that a public campaign focused on helping the Southern Ocean ecosystem will help get the MPA issue unstuck. Today, we are planning on discussing the ramifications of this, the solutions, and what all of you can do to join the fight and make a difference. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dan Keeler, the Director of Communications at Newday Impact, and Mitch Radcliffe, our partner at Earth 911 and Intentional Futures, who will moderate today's discussion. With that, Dan, let me pass things over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Doug. That was a very good introduction. You've actually made my life a lot easier by covering some of that ground. Welcome, everyone. Delighted that you're able to join us today. We've got a really, really interesting group of people to discuss this crucially important facts about what's going on with the Southern Ocean. And we're going to be covering some of the challenges that the ocean is facing through as a result of the human impact on it. We're also going to be looking at some of the solutions. I'm particularly excited with the panelists that we have gathered today. I'll just quickly run through the order of the show, the run of show effectively, and the people that we're going to be hearing from. We'll be kicking off with a presentation from Ashland Cousteau, who's going to be talking about the state of the oceans, krill, the carbon impact of the collapse of the Southern Ocean krill population. And she will be giving us some details on that based on her research and her work with the Earth Echo International, which is a non-profit run by her and Philippe Cousteau, who I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. After that, Doug will be explaining Newday's role in facilitating funding into that program, into a program to protect the Southern Ocean and as a channel for supporting ocean health generally. And then we're going to have a discussion with our esteemed panelists today, including Millicent Pitts from Ocean Exchange, Erin Niederhellman, who's from Monger.fish, Melissa Walton, who was formerly at As You Sow, and Philip Stratman, who's at Ocean Power Technologies. Doug will also be part of that discussion. So that will be about 25 minutes or so. And then I will be moderating a discussion with Elizabeth Kim, who is at the US State Department and has been working on negotiations to establish marine protected areas and other ways to protect our ocean. So we'll be discussing that towards the end. At the end of that discussion, we'll be able to have a Q&A session. So please put your questions in the chat or save questions until the end. But we are going to have an open Q&A with everybody on this call. So I don't want to hold it up any longer. I'd love Ashland to be able to jump in now and tell us all about the Southern Ocean. Ashland, welcome.
Thank you so much to you, and thank you to Doug. Newday has been just an incredible partner and champion for the ocean as a whole. And the ocean needs us, needs every single one of us. So thank you both to you and to Newday as a whole. All right, well, I figured I would get started. I know, especially seeing some of the people that have been saying hello that are here joining us. I'm just going to pretend that people on the call don't know anything about the ocean, though I know all of you do. I feel like it's always best to just set the groundwork, right, of why we're all here. So for many of you, I'm sure my last name might sound a little familiar. Cousteau is a name that is synonymous with the ocean. It is a name that is synonymous with conservation. And it is a name that is synonymous with problem solving. My husband, Philippe Cousteau, is the third generation of that family. Our two little children, who are 4 and 2, two little girls, are the fourth generation of that incredible legacy. And I can tell you that while I have been doing this work for about a decade and a half, almost 2 decades now, it wasn't until I looked into our newborn's eyes when I decided to not double but quadruple down on this work. When one looks out on the ocean, we usually see hope, we see excitement, we see mystery. But what we don't see is what's happening. Many of the issues that are facing our ocean are things that we can't necessarily see with our own eyes. But we also don't see our ocean as our largest ally in our fight against the climate catastrophe. That's one thing that I want every single one of us to walk away today thinking about, is our ocean is our biggest partner and the biggest part of our solution. So let's talk about why we should care about our oceans in general. Well, number one, they provide food to many people across the world. They provide the main source of protein to billions of people across the planet. Our ocean is also responsible for producing more than 50% of the available oxygen that is in our atmosphere. While we all love the Amazon, it is the lungs of our terrestrial planet, but our ocean is truly the lungs of our planet. And also, as I talked about, it being an ally for us in climate, our ocean is also part of our largest carbon sink on the planet. And that is something that also we're gonna drill down into. So if we like to eat, breathe, drink clean air, eat produce that's grown on land, we all need to thank the ocean for its vital services that it provides us every single day. And yet it's usually the afterthought. In the conservation movement, is the afterthought in the carbon solutions. And even when we talk about climate change, it's usually an afterthought, even though it's our ocean that controls our climate. So let's talk about some of the problems that our ocean is facing. We have everything from, from pH increasing, from our ocean absorbing all of that carbon, which is doing us a favor, but it's also really destructive to our ocean. We all know about the plastic pollution that we have going on into our ocean, but we also forget about the agricultural runoff and the urban runoff. It's really quite scary and depressing when we think of all the horrible things that we're doing to our ocean. And if those things were done on land, no one would stand for it. But since it's done on our ocean, usually people don't think about it. But also, as Doug pointed out, overfishing is a huge issue. 90%, our best guesstimate is 90% of our fish stocks are either fished to capacity or they are overfished. That is a staggering number, especially when we think about those billions of people across the planet that rely on the ocean as their only source of protein. But even if you don't eat fish, if you don't really care about plastic in your seafood, or you don't necessarily care about carbon, we don't think about what an unstable ocean would do for us. Also, some of the problems seem so big and so overwhelming that it's hard to think of the solutions. But it was just a couple of years ago that Philippe and I came across a problem that, number one, we didn't even know was an issue. And number two, we found that is a problem that is actually solvable, pretty easily solvable. And that actually got us really excited. There's not a lot of low-hanging fruit when it comes to what's happening on our planet, but we really think that this problem is one that with some work we could all solve and have a big win for our world and our ocean. So I want to take you down to a part of our ocean, right? There's only one ocean. It's one continuous ecosystem, but us humans, we like to give the different parts of the ocean different names. So I want to talk about the Southern Ocean. So the Southern Ocean is the coldest part of our ocean. It is bursting with nutrients. It is home to incredible species. But it's also the start of our ocean conveyor belt. It is the start. It's super cold. When things are cold, they want to go warm. And when things are warm, they want to go cold, right? So it's this super cold water that's full of these vital nutrients from down in the Southern Ocean that make their way up into the equator where they warm. They go back up to the Arctic, they get cold, and they start the process all over again. And it's actually that ocean current conveyor belt that is the driving force of our climate. Now, when we first started doing some work for Antarctica 2020, it's a group of people that have come together to try to get 3 new marine protected areas established in the Southern Ocean. The way the Southern Ocean MPAs work is you need to have all of the countries that have signed on to CAMLAR vote, and it has to be a unanimous vote. Currently, there are 2 countries that are holding out, Russia and China. And when we started to dig a little bit more, asking, well, why are they digging? There can be many different issues for many different reasons for countries saying, voting no for specific issues. But on this one, the main reason that Russia and China are voting no, it's because they want to continue. Well, for Russia, they want to start ramping up their krill fishery. And for China, they want to continue fishing for krill. And when I asked why are they fishing all the way in the Southern Ocean for krill, the answer honestly shocked me. And 60% of the market value for krill that are fished out of the Southern Ocean, one of the most faraway places on the planet, 60% of that market value is coming here to North America for nutraceuticals, specifically for omega-3s. And when I found that out, I couldn't believe my ears, because as many of you on this call know, fish and krill don't make their own omega-3s. They get the omega-3s by eating algae. So we're thinking we're disrupting the entire Southern Ocean system for a product that's completely replaceable. And that's when we decided that this was the largest climate catastrophe that no one knows about. Because as I talked about, the ocean providing us most of our oxygen, that is thanks in part to a system that is very specific to the Southern Ocean. And it is the phytoplankton, krill, whale cycle. It's the phytoplankton that actually is responsible for most of that oxygen production. As I mentioned earlier, the Southern Ocean is one of the most nutritious, most seeded with the most stuff, good, yummy stuff. The Southern Ocean is arguably the basis of the entire ocean food web across our planet. And when we think of all of the amazing species that live in the Southern Ocean, we think of the whales, we think of the seals, we think of the birds, we think of the penguins, of course. What's so fascinating about this incredible system down there is that everything either eats krill directly or eats something that eats krill. So again, the fact that we're going down there and scooping up krill at an enormous rate right now, and as Doug said, the krill industry is looking to increase up to 8 times its current capacity. We were just flabbergasted. I mean, we're taking out a keystone species in the most important part of our world's ocean for a product that's completely replaceable. I mean, that's just an example of humans doing something that's dumb. I also want to highlight why that is so dumb is because that system down there, the phytoplankton, the krill, the whales, they are responsible. The krill specifically is responsible for absorbing about 22 million tons of carbon a year. But this system is responsible for almost, at a, let's just say, conservative number, absorbing 12 billion tons of carbon a year. 12 billion tons of carbon a year. And that's just doing its own thing. If we just leave it alone, it will keep working for us. And I think that was another thing that frustrated Philippe and I so much, and I know Doug as well, when you start looking at this and the spending that we're doing on the markets that we're doing to start building carbon capture plants, the price of those carbon capture plants and the amount of carbon they're going to pull from the atmosphere is so little compared to these natural sources and these natural systems that we have in place that are doing it for free. We just have to give them a chance. So again, that is when our eyes were open to krill. And I hope you don't, that isn't lost on you. I mean, Philippe has been doing this his whole life, pretty much in utero. He's been doing ocean conservation. And even for him, he did not realize that this was an issue just until a couple of years ago. So again, we are disrupting our largest carbon sink on the planet, one of the major producers of our oxygen, and the basis of the entire ocean food web, to go down and fish out the keystone species of that ecosystem, to come in and make it into omega-3 supplements, and then also aquaculture feed and pet food, when there are better solutions that are actually more absorbable by the human body. So for us, I don't want to give you all the negative stuff without giving you the hope. The hope is, we know that marine protected areas work. We've seen it with our own eyes. I dove in the crater that was created by the Castle Bravo nuclear blast. It was the largest nuclear bomb the United States ever detonated over on Bikini Atoll. After we detonated 23 nuclear bombs over there, 60 years later, we went back. And when we got into the water, it was the most spectacular thing I've ever seen. There were groupers the size of my dog who's floating around the background. She's a Siberian Husky. There was healthy coral. There were giant clams that were the size of a table. There were fish. There were sharks everywhere, about 70 gray reef sharks every time we got in the water. And that was just 60 years after humans threw the worst of humanity at these little islands in the form of nuclear disaster. But because those areas are still radioactive, they've kind of turned into de facto marine protected areas. We've also seen this in places throughout Europe and the Mediterranean. We've seen this in Cabo Pulmo. We know marine protected areas work. They're one of the best tools we have in our tool shed when it comes to not only meeting our goal of protecting 30% of our planet by 2030, but also to go in and really safeguard these highly active, these highly biodiverse areas. We know it can work. So again, the fact that the 3 marine protected areas that are proposed in the Southern Ocean are being blocked because of the krill fishing industry is just absolutely crazy. The good news is we know marine protected areas can do it. We also know that even China has put their second krill fishing ship on hold. It's halfway built, it is on hold right now, as the government is looking at the true cost of the subsidies and the true cost of going all the way to the Southern Ocean to fish out krill. So we know we're at this inflection point. We know we're at a very important point in the history of humankind. If we can get these 3 marine protected areas established, it'll be the largest act of conservation in the history of humans. It would be about 1% of our total ocean, which is really incredible. It'll get us so much closer to our goal of 2030. And I'm just so glad that you all are here today to learn more, specifically about the Southern Ocean and specifically about krill. They are our superheroes, about the size of your thumb, and they're the superheroes of our sea. And what we need to do is just keep them in the ocean and keep them working for us, selfishly. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I really appreciate that. Again, appreciate being here, and thank you to all the panelists for being here, because we're all in the same boat, as Grandpa would say.
Ashland, that was great. Thank you very much. And I love the positive stuff in there. Just your description of the ecology that's kind of returned around the Bikini Atoll. That is. I must admit, it never even occurred to me that that would come back and flourish like that. But that's such a great example of the benefits of protecting marine areas, albeit protecting them by dropping nuclear bombs on them 60 years ago. That's maybe not the smartest way to do it, but the end result is phenomenal. So really fascinating to hear that. And also, whenever we're having discussions about environmental impact caused by human beings, it's always nice to actually hear some positive stories as well. That it's not all doom and gloom. There is a light at the end of the tunnel in many ways, and that's one of the things that personally for me about the krill story, and the fact that we are extracting so many of them from the ocean to create these nutraceuticals. That story is so inspiring because, as you mentioned, Ashlyn, there's a potential win here for environmentalists. And I'm sure many of the people on this call, listening in, certainly people on the panel, have been environmentalists for many, many years, if not decades. And for me personally, it's been a bit of a disheartening experience because we see these things coming decades ahead of when they actually really become a crisis, and we watch them becoming worse and worse and worse, and then they become a crisis. And then we start to think about doing something about it. This is one of those rare occasions where we can see a problem looming, and we know we have a solution that can be deployed pretty much on balance, cost-free. That's something, I think we'll be discussing that more during the panel. The efforts that can be made to protect the ocean and how that can work out economically. But I hope that the audience is inspired by that as I am, because the prospect for replacing this source of omega-3 with a source that's actually more environmentally friendly and more effective really just seems like a tremendous opportunity. So Ashlyn, thank you very much for that, those details, that illustration of the effectiveness of protecting the ocean. And for sharing your experience. So we're now going to move on to the panel discussion. And the way that I'd like to do this, I haven't actually told the panelists this yet, so it might come as a surprise, but I'd like them each to introduce themselves and their organizations for 1 to 2 minutes, just so that we all know who we're talking to, and to give us an idea of what role they're playing in, or want to play, or hope to play in ocean health. So I would like to start with Millicent Pitts from Ocean Exchange. Could you just give us a quick rundown on yourself and Ocean Exchange, please?
Thank you, Dan and Doug. And I jumped at the chance to be here today because I wanted to learn more about this. So thank you, Ashlyn. I learned a lot, but I also want to help and share. So I'm the Executive Director of Ocean Exchange. We're in year 13. We're a US-based international 501c3, and we operate in a little different space than some of you. We take family and corporate philanthropy and we aggregate it. We go out and find solutions, and we use that word in a very purposeful way. We vet them through a lot of subject matter experts. And then we sort of test them at an event, they pitch and so forth, and then we redistribute that philanthropy to them. That's half of what we do. The other half, we help them in various other ways, and there's not enough time to talk about that. I will give a shout out. I see that Mark Schroep of Schmidt Marine is logged in, and they're one of the groups that support our work. So how we fit into all of this, we don't get into policy, we don't develop it or advocate for it, we facilitate it. So some of the solutions help make better policy, so data and other information that informs policy. And once policy and maybe follow-on regulation is there, we have solutions that allow for the effective use and regulation of that policy. So we're sort of on the front end and the back end of the policy conversation. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you here. Melissa, would you like to introduce yourself and your organization?
Sure, yes. My name is Melissa Walton. I am here as an individual right now. So my background is as a natural science educator and primarily in marine education. I did research on different human impacts on the marine world, one being the entanglement of humpback whales in fishing gear, and two, looking at in Cuba how to maintain the health of their coral reefs if and when they opened up to more tourism, and if at the time the US was considering opening up to Cuba, what would happen with tourism and the impacts there on Cuba. More recently, I've been involved in shareholder advocacy with As You Sow, and so looking at climate governance, primarily looking at companies and helping them understand their climate risk, and that climate risk is financial risk. So happy to be here bringing 2 of these areas of interest to this conversation.
Great. We're very glad to have you here. Erin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Dan, thank you for including me in the panel discussion. And Doug, thanks for having me on. I appreciate that. I wanted to go back to something that Ashlyn mentioned, I think is very important, is the fact that, and then you brought attention to it too as well, hope. All too often, the peril and the problems get the headlines, and that's challenging. And in the mindset of folks that are trying to tackle these problems, or even just folks that are listening to the news, or folks that are trying to go to their day-to-day lives, it's just a common practice to then turn your eyes and look the other way and not be involved. So the more that we can have solutions of hope and potential, I think is a key step. And I'm calling in from New England, North Shore of Massachusetts, which we have a bit of experience here of fishing down the commons, starting with the whaling industry, the cod industry, tuna, and we seem to keep going down to the lowest trophic level as possible. And I work within two organizations. One's a for-profit entity that is focused on taking what we do well here in New England still within our clean, cold waters, and decommoditizing those products and providing those as an offering to more folks that are looking for the stories of the people, place, and products that often tap the nostalgia of a lot of individuals that have connections to New England. The second part of it is I work within a multi-stakeholder initiative with a bunch of different organizations, NGOs, academic groups, policymakers, for-profit entities, in working together as a partnership in order to save the wonderful Great Marsh, which is sitting here behind me, and my friends at the PI LTER facility, which is the Plum Island Estuary Long-Term Ecological Research Center, which is one of 28 facilities that we have around the United States, Tahiti, Puerto Rico, and actually 2 in Antarctica, that are focused on the systems, the ecological systems, the all-important ecological systems, and how we must be involved in that. So I think what I will focus on today is that importance of partnership and that essential element of finding the common ground to bring forward these solutions and bring that hope to a broader audience. Thanks for having me.
Great. And I think I'm going to your idea of hope as well. I think that might be the theme for this panel. Let's keep the focus on that, because it's great to just kind of think about these sort of positive stories that can come from this. Philip, would you mind introducing yourself and sharing a bit about your organization?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, Dan, and it's great to be on. And yeah, Philip Stratman, I'm the CEO and president of Ocean Power Technologies. We're a public company listed in the US with ticker symbol OPTT. And to some of the points that have already been raised and what Ashlyn said, what we're excited about bringing to the panel is the fact that the technologies to do the enforcement around MPAs and to do monitoring around our ocean exist today, and they are primarily available powered by renewable power. So you power them by the ocean to provide additional benefit in the ocean, and I think that's what excites us. And it's great to see that these tools and technologies, which largely, in our case, came out of originally renewable energy research, currently being rapidly adopted actually by a part of the industry most people wouldn't suspect is adopting these rapidly, and that's defense and national security, because they are seeing the value in having these autonomous zero emission systems all over the ocean to figure out what's going on where, probably for other intents at times than fishery protection. However, the intersection between homeland security and illegal fishing is one that certainly in the United States has been officially called out in strategy papers by the Department of Homeland Security and the US Coast Guard, which only a couple of years ago named illegal fishing the biggest maritime threat after terrorism. So being able to bring to the discussion the fact that these tools and technologies exist, and that the work that the environmental side, the policy side, the regulatory side, and the investment side is looking to support is able to be done and developed and deployed today. I think that's something we find very exciting.
Great. Well, that's actually triggered a thought for me, which is, and I feel like this is kind of how I'm going to get this discussion started, is really like, how much do we really know about what's going on beneath the surface of the ocean? I mean, it's really, really big, isn't it? Like, Philip, can you kind of fill us in on that? It's like, that feels like that.
Yeah, we don't know a lot.
Yeah.
So it's what we found amazing. Every time we deploy one of our systems, be that one of our wave power buoys, or we go out with an autonomous vehicle to do seabed survey, or whatever else somebody is contracting us to do out there, you find something new. And if you go back to the same spot just the next day, or a week later, or a month later, or a year later to resurvey it and relook at it and re-listen, you find something new. And that's exciting. What that also means is that it requires the working together of a huge amount of stakeholders to go and collect the data and make sense of it. Because the ocean is such a vast place, and it is so hard to figure out what happens in which specific part of the ocean, you have to integrate, extrapolate, interpolate between the various data points that you've got, and then based on that, move into active enforcements in the part where it has the most impact. And I think we believe that there's an impact scale that you can go and start walking down by making sure that you measure what needs to be measured in parts where otherwise you don't have access to, particularly below the surface. We can have satellites scanning the surface of the ocean forever and a day, but it's not going to tell us what happens between the seabed and the surface. And I think that's going to be critical to really pinpoint the limited resources that we have available in general, to then make enforcement and interdiction to protect the parts of the ocean where we have the highest desire today.
And then what about coordination as well? Because obviously we've got a huge number of organizations that are gathering data, as you say, that are monitoring the ocean, that are operating in the ocean, that are responsible for policing the ocean in one way or another. How can we ensure, or how can we establish a system where information is shared effectively? Because presumably there's a lot of overlap between those organizations and some inefficiency in how they share information. But it seems like the more we know and the more we can coordinate and kind of, as you say, triangulate between these different data points, the better chance we'll have of actually protecting the ocean.
Certainly from our perspective, we work with a broad range of organizations within the government, particularly in the United States, with overseas governments, with non-governmental organizations, commercial entities, and so on and so forth. And you've actually just identified an additional problem that exists. You can collect the data and you can collect it today, but depending on who collects it, it's not going to be as freely available to everybody as it would be if it is, a scientific or research institution. So the working together I see as less of a problem, because there's lots of pieces of the puzzle that are being solved all around the place, but it's putting them somewhere where people have access to it that can then make the most of it. But as I said, depending on who's paid to gather the information, it might not be as easily available. The data formats that come out of these things are
Right.
pretty straightforward,
Right.
because that's easily shareable. But it's the petabytes of data you collect and who do they belong to and how do you use them? That's where it gets critical.
Mm-hmm. So, Millie, I'd love to bring you in on this point about coordination. What's been your experience in terms of different organizations working together and sharing and collaborating? And, do you see opportunities to improve that, and for organizations like yours to step up and kind of provide some of that interface?
Yes, I think this has been a huge issue. We're awash in data, but we don't have all the right information in the right hands, right? It's like living in a desert coastal area and not having any water to drink. I was invited to be on the U.S. NOAA subcommittee for the blue economy in 2020. And this issue of data and the sharing of it, no matter what other topic we talked about, we ended up back talking about this particular topic. It is central now to everything. So we're talking about hope, and Ocean Exchange is about solutions. So I'll say some hopeful things here. NOAA, for example, and we're a beneficiary, has started an ocean-based climate accelerator program, and money is flowing from the U.S. IRA funding into this, and we're in a phase 1 of this, and it will help. It will provide some platforms for more collaboration of this, and I don't think there is one thing that's going to solve it all. I'll tell you also, I was just in Newport, Rhode Island, and I know that we have people from New England here, and heard about a product called Blue Nerve, and it's an accessible platform where data is going to exist and make it more accessible across a lot of other parties. And the price to get into it is a server, and you have to agree to share some information. And there is a private company that is putting this together. So I think there are things happening in this direction. There's a big program, Seabed 2050, there's Lakebed 2030. There are a lot of these other programs that are intended to get the data and make it more accessible to all the right parties.
That's great. I mean, it's really good to hear as well. And thank you for keeping the focus on hope as well. I think one of the key factors that we've mentioned earlier on is the power of the consumer. Sorry, Melissa, would you be able to talk to us about how we can harness the power of the consumer to help with ocean health? I'm just going to do a little full disclosure and confession moment here, which is that I didn't have time to have lunch, so I grabbed a Gatorade. I'm not sure it's a good alternative to lunch, but I grabbed this on the way to here to sit down for this meeting. And I'm looking at this empty plastic bottle, and I'm like, there's a good chance that's going to end up in the ocean. I don't know how to avoid that. So any thoughts about how consumers can change their behavior, change companies' behavior, or change governments' behavior to help push forward this idea of protection?
Oh, big question. So I think a couple of things that come to mind is first just the idea that it's the consumer needs to change their behavior versus the companies potentially changing their behavior, and not putting it entirely on the consumer, because it's overwhelming to understand, what each company is doing, how much plastic are they using, recycled, is it, you're going to a grocery store, you're thirsty, and you want to get, so is there a way to move some of that responsibility to the company to create their products in a more sustainable fashion in the beginning? In terms of the consumer, I think for this issue, I was very hopeful to hear Ashlyn say this is a low-hanging fruit. For businesses, it is ideal to find a win-win here, right? Like, they are thinking about financial success, and they might be thinking about it, unfortunately, on a shorter term time frame than we would like in terms of the long term. Like, okay, if they can make their money overfishing krill in 3 years and are allowed to do so, then they can switch to whatever's next. But so there's a couple of things, like, you need all of these levers working together. For the consumer, this education that we're doing right now is really important, so they even understand it's an issue, so that they can then, if some companies are making the switch earlier on to algae for this, that they can look for that then, and understand that there is a difference between picking a krill nutraceutical versus an algae nutraceutical. I think Newday, this Ahoy, is another way, so that you make sure that you as a consumer are investing your money in the way that you want to for ocean health, and can trust your investments are going to an actively managed ETF that is in fact making changes.
Yeah, I think, thank you for that. The key in this is awareness, right? Like, how do we, I'm asking you, Melissa, like, how do you think we can raise awareness of just how important the ecosystem in the ocean is, and then translate fully into action? I mean, this is very close to our heart of the program we're working on, to try and the krill. But so a few analysts can join on that question as well. Like, what's the
mean,
Who should we
if I
do?
had the answer to that, but I think there's different ways to go about it. I think there are differences in investors, individual investors, based on age. You'll see your younger investors are willing to take a bit of a financial difference in their investments to protect the things they care about, to invest their values. And so to invest their values, they need to understand what's at stake. And that is, like there are a lot of levers for change. And so the education is not only on ecosystems and krill and that, but also them understanding where their power lies, right? As an investor, where they can make changes in the way that they invest as consumers. And I think for some of that, you need to start meeting people where they get their information. So if nutraceuticals are where 60% of this is going in the Northern Hemisphere, what age range is this going to? Where are they finding their education? I think for some of us, I'm not on TikTok, but that is where a lot of education is happening now. So just really expanding ideas as to how you reach consumers and really make that strategy based on the data you have of who's buying and who can change their ways. So.
Yeah. I have to say, if my children are anything to go by, 90% of the education is coming through Krill at the moment. It's quite extraordinary. Do you want to in on this?
Yeah, please. Thank you. So I do think it's a big awareness discussion, and I think there is a big generational divide. I think that actually the younger generations are much more engaged and wanting to be involved in these types of programs. On the investor side, I read a recent stat or report basically saying that $90 trillion was going to be inherited in the next 20 years. That's a massive amount of money that'll be going as investment dollars to what could go to impact, like Ahoy or other programs that will have vast impact on the oceans and really on planetary issues and climate issues as a whole. And the only solution to climate change and food system problems is between the ears. So the key is these awareness campaigns that gets people involved. On the ocean and related to keeping people engaged in somewhat has been Never Land. As Ashlyn had mentioned, that it's so vast, it's so big, it's so tough to connect to often that you try to find these mechanisms to bring people in. But I think over 50% of the global population lives within shouting distance of the coastline. And you have a unique opportunity within academic programs, within education, within working with retailers and CPG products to bring these more mainstream, to bring back the explorers, to bring back the excitement and enthusiasm for folks that are taking on some of these challenges. We come at it from the food side of things, and I think that is another great vector into making people aware of the importance of clean oceans is the cleanliness and the quality of the food that they're consuming versus what they don't get in those tainted or challenged waters that they may be getting from other spots where you don't have transparency and traceability. So it may be a bit of a slow burn, it may be a trickle effect, but all of those things I think add up into making folks more aware and asking those questions. I think there are those instigators and those elixirs like capital, invested capital to get things moving quickly. And I think it's going to be the free market and invested capital to be the places to do that, as usually government forces are reactionary to get involved in those. That's my personal opinion, but
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. And Melissa mentioned just now that for consumers, it's sort of overwhelming to try and or for consumers to have that responsibility on them. It should be the corporations that are effectively serving them that should be taking this responsibility. In light of that, Aaron, feel optimistic. Hope that there.
Oh, well, sure. I mean, we deal a lot with shellfish production, which could be defined as regenerative ocean farming, and regenerative agriculture has having its day in the limelight. Which when something was 5 years ago, no one had heard of or was talking about soil health, or what that capacity could really represent for the climate issues, for the quality of the food you get, the impact on humans, on farmers, on food animals. I feel that, and this could be partially confirmation bias as I pay attention to this news, but I think that is creeping into mainstream media. And I do believe that people are much more aware of not just the food system problems, but the opportunities that have arisen and how to be more involved in that and what that represents in a local and regionalized food system, for food security, for that potential of food as medicine. So it's maybe an avalanche of information coming at people that only the good parts will eventually come to the bottom. But collectively, I think we will get there. And in the next few years, I do believe food will be one of the most significant climate action vehicles and mechanisms that we have. It is the most intimate connection to nature that we have. So that is a great place to begin.
Yeah, that's true. And we're already seeing that with people's growing awareness of the impact of eating meat versus eating a vegetarian diet and so on, the widespread understanding of that in terms of climate change. So we're going to be hearing from Elizabeth Kim in a little while, and she's going to be giving us the US government perspective, or the US State Department perspective, on protecting the ocean and a few other subjects as well. But so, one of the key things is how companies and governments can interact to kind of push forward some of these ideas. So this really is a question for the panel as a whole. Do any of you have thoughts on how to accelerate or improve those relationships so that companies and governments can work together to try and create solutions to some of these problems? Anyone want to jump on?
Maybe as a US domiciled company doing a lot of work with the US government, I think there's lots of good conversation happening, but a lot of the technologies that are coming to the fore that are available today to help fix some of these problems come from the non-traditional supply sector. They're not coming from the billion-dollar revenues prime contractors. Because a lot of this is new tech. It either comes out of venture capital backed entities or out of microcap stocks, right? Like where we sit. And working with the US government, where it has traditionally been more of a one size fits all approach, which is like, you need a procurement department or supply department of hundreds of people in order to kind of make your way through the contracting mechanisms within Commerce or DOD or DHS or wherever else you're working. That is an ongoing barrier at times that slows down some of that work. Having said that, the sort of the prevalence, I think, as Aaron said, of this coming to mainstream news nowadays and to the consumers is starting to help change the conversation. And we're seeing the fact that there's much more of an interest in, demonstrations and rapid deployments of modified off-the-shelf solutions that are available right now, so that companies can step into it more easily and work with the government.
So we only work with startups. We don't work with the big primes. And we see this every single day, the challenge that you're talking about. I do think that there are some important roles for the government. You take something like ARPA-E, which is in the Department of Energy. They see some of these very early technologies and help wring out the risk so that the private sector can come in with capital, because the private sector would never really take that very, very early risk. And what I hear more recently, the ARPA-E, I'm using this as an example, that they're trying to understand how to even further help those companies. So getting the ARPA-E money and that help for that period of time isn't enough, and there is still a gap before they can be invested in a traditional way. There are areas in the world, like in Canada, where there are public-private partnerships. There's the Canadian Ocean Supercluster Fund, and it's a public-private partnership, and they make investments. So there are models to be followed. There have been recommendations that NOAA form something like ARPA-O, which is modeled after ARPA-E, using U.S. federal money to de-risk technologies so that they, can move forward in the financing system. And I would also say there's still a role for philanthropic money to help bridge that gap as well for some of these.
Yeah, definitely.
Dan, can it?
Yeah, go on. Yep.
I was just going to mention, Amelia had mentioned it earlier. Staying with our theme of this of hope, I think over the last couple of years, there's been a monumental change in the support of government and programs around the IRA and the Inflation Reduction Act with $369 billion of resources, $207 billion of going to clean energy and energy storage. That is just a complete shift. And as you get into the nuance of how those systems worked, they've been often in these cases waived the matching requirements. They've sped up and fast tracked these programs. They've allowed for other groups to be involved in these types of opportunities. They've now allowed for, and Millie just mentioned this now, commingling philanthropic and even corporate money with those federal resources to have significant and lasting impact. And that's a huge step forward. And I look forward to hearing Dr. Kim's point of view on that. And when it comes to the ocean side of it, to ground us a bit more, I think NOAA received maybe 3-4 billion of that as a collective, which is, compared to what we all know the vast problems are and what the solutions could be, but still a step in the right direction. And again, if this is an awareness discussion, it allows the same decision makers to realize, yes, we're starting to look at soil health and alternative energy programs, and now we need another large influx of capital to look at our ocean problems and our overfishing problems, and to find these types of solutions like the krill fishery in the Antarctic, and really invest in those programs so we can stabilize some big problems that could quickly get out of control.
Yeah.
I'll give a shout out to New England again. Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
We'll take it.
So there were 31 tech hubs established last fall. And there's only one for ocean out of the 31, and it's in Rhode Island. And it is an opportunity for public, private partnerships, philanthropy to all work together in that tech hub. The establishment of the tech hub was phase 1. The phase 2 applications went in last Thursday, February 29th, and they should know by the summer, according to the Department of Commerce. This is all done through the EDA, not through NOAA. And the only climate resiliency tech hub is in South Florida, and they too put in their phase 2. So there is a lot of hope there.
Yeah, that's very encouraging to hear. And obviously with this theme of hope, that fits perfectly. So we're coming up on time for the end of this panel. Unfortunately, I feel like I've got about a dozen more questions I want to ask all of you. But I'm going to stick with one. And I'd like each of you just to think, is there a success that you can point to, enlightenments to hear about that will just help us to understand that there are real solutions being developed? Success.
I'll take one. I'll take one. Yeah, we actually we deployed several of our autonomous vehicles up in Alaska over the course of last summer to do seabed surveys of Good News Bay, near the MPA there, and by doing that with small autonomous vehicle, displaced thousands of metric tons of CO2 that would have come from a traditional survey vessel. It was less people in harm's way, less impact on the environment, and higher fidelity of data gathered. So I think when I say these solutions exist and they're being utilized, that is the kind of success story that exists. They are being deployed and they have a measurable impact, because you no longer go in there with bunker fuel burning survey vessels.
Yeah.
It's a completely different environment that way around.
That's amazing. I'd love to hear that. Any other
I have
stories?
one to offer.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So we gave $10,000 to 3 Stanford students in 2015. And at that time, they were called Opus 12. They've graduated. They're now the Company 12. They've raised through a B round 180 something million. They broke ground on a facility in the state of Washington. Microsoft invested in it. Air Alaska is a partner. They take captured carbon and they recycle it into fuel. Their initial vertical is aviation fuel, but they think they can do marine fuel and other materials. We later gave them 100,000 non-dilutive funds in 2019, soon after they graduated. They are well on their way to success. And I have 100 success stories to be hopeful.
Well, that would keep us going for well beyond the end of this panel, but that's a really good one to end on. So regrettably, that does bring us to the end of this particular part of the event, but thank you so much to all our panelists. I really appreciate your insights, and please stick a Q&A. So that's to Elizabeth now. Elizabeth, which in ocean, Arctic, and Antarctic environmental, economic, and security affairs. So she's currently the U.S. Commissioner of the Commission to U.S. Commissioner to the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, and she led the U.S. delegation to the negotiations of the new High Seas Treaty. So we have here a very, very significant character in many of the negotiations that we've been talking about, and I'm very excited to learn more about what you're doing, Elizabeth, and what the U.S. government's doing. So I'm actually not seeing Elizabeth on the screen. Elizabeth,
I am here, but unfortunately, can you hear me? Okay. Well, unfortunately, my State Department computer will not let me sign in through your system. So I am precariously balancing a phone so I can keep it plugged in the one plug that I have access to because I cannot plug my phone into my computer. And now I find that my apparently my camera does not seem to be working properly. So
well, I know what your office looks like, and it looks exactly as you would expect an office inside the State Department to look. So if everyone can visualize that, and then we'll just have your voice, I think that's perfectly acceptable. So Elizabeth, before we dive into questions about krill and the Southern Ocean, can you tell us a little bit about what the State Department's doing to manage and protect the ocean?
Yes, and thank you for inviting me here. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
I have learned a lot. So let me just tell you a little bit about, for those of you who may not know about the State Department, we actually have two offices dedicated to ocean issues. The Ocean and Polar Affairs, which is the office that I lead, and the Office of Marine Conservation, which is our sister office here at the department. So the Office of Marine Conservation, or OMC, is the fisheries office. They formulate and implement U.S. policy on a broad range of international marine conservation issues in order to ensure economic prosperity and security through healthy, sustainably managed fisheries in the oceans and Great Lakes. So as I said, they are the State Department lead on all marine fisheries except for in the Southern Ocean, which my office happens to lead because we also do polar affairs. So my office, Ocean and Polar Affairs, or OPA, is responsible for U.S. policy on international issues concerning the ocean, the Arctic, and the Antarctic. On the ocean side of the house, we handle almost every international ocean issue outside of fisheries. So we do marine conservation, marine protected areas, the law of the sea, the BB&J agreement, marine science, marine pollution, maritime security, maritime zones and boundaries, and even deep seabed mining. Now we also lead U.S. international engagement in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean, which is what we're going to talk about more in a few minutes. This area, I have to say, is new for me. I have worked in the ocean arena all my life, but I have been learning for the past year all about Antarctica, and it's been a fascinating journey, so I'll be able to share some of that with you all. And just to finish up with this, our priorities on the ocean side of the house right now are marine protected areas, both within and beyond national jurisdiction. That's number one. Number two, issues related to the ocean climate nexus, including ocean acidification and sea level rise. And number 3, scaling up ocean finance to support a sustainable blue economy. So many of the important issues you've all been discussing today.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, those 3 issues are, well, those 3 things are basically the entire agenda for today. So this is absolutely perfect. It sounds like you've got an awful lot on your plate. Do you have a staff of thousands doing this?
We are an office of about, I think, 28 right now. So yes,
28.
and we all worked way too much.
Not 28,000, this is 28 people.
Yeah, just 28.
Excellent. About the international regime in the Southern Ocean.
Okay, so the Antarctic Treaty System, or ATS, provides a structure for international cooperation for all areas south of 60 degrees south latitude, and primarily includes the Antarctic Treaty and its protocol on environmental protection, as well as the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, or CAMLR, and then all of the legally binding measures adopted under these instruments. So the convention, the CAMLR Convention, and the commission it established is the key piece for our discussion today. The CAMLR Convention entered into force in 1982, and it covers all ocean waters south of the Antarctic convergence. So in some places, it goes a little bit north of 60 degrees south latitude. And the area that CAMLR covers, the marine area that it covers, is around 10% of the Earth's ocean. There are 37 contracting parties to CAMLR, of which 27 of them, including the United States, are members of the Commission. So there are more contracting parties than there are members of the Commission. The membership to the Commission is open to any contracting party that is engaged in research or harvesting activities in the Convention area. And members of the Commission, that smaller body, take part in decision-making and contribute to the budget. So just 2 more points on CAMLR. The singular objective of the convention is, as its name implies, the conservation of Antarctic marine living resources. That is the objective. Under the convention, the term conservation includes rational use. And then the final point on the convention is that it takes a precautionary ecosystem-focused approach to resource management. So back to you, Dan. I know you can't see me. Do you know, Dan, I cannot hear you, but I hear someone typing. So I am not quite sure what's going on.
That's because I was muted. There you go. Nobody heard that question.
Okay.
So I was just saying that, so we're talking about krill today, obviously. That's the key topic that we're covering. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of krill management under CAMLR?
Yes, and this is part of the new stuff I've been learning about as I was preparing for this talk. So
Great.
It turns out that see, I'm learning something new as well. A key impetus for negotiating the CAMLR Convention was concern that unregulated increases in krill catches in the Southern Ocean could be detrimental for Antarctic marine ecosystems. So since its establishment, CAMLR has taken a precautionary approach to krill harvesting that recognizes the role of krill as a keystone species in the Antarctic ecosystem. The total allowable catch for the area where most of the krill fishing takes place, it's called Area 48, is about 5.6 million tons per fishing season. But the CAMLR krill management focuses on a trigger level of catch, which is significantly less than the total allowable catch. And the trigger level for this area is 620,000 tons per fishing season. So again, the total allowable catch is at 5.6 million, but the trigger level that we're managing to is 620,000 tons per fishing season. The trigger level is the amount of catch that can be taken sustainably within the measures currently in place. And the trigger level itself is divided across 4 sub areas to avoid any localized impacts to krill dependent predators. And CAMLR also has in place a set of measures to manage the vessels that harvest krill, such as prior notification of harvesting vessels, licensing requirements, operation of vessel monitoring systems, bycatch mitigation requirements, and reporting of catch. So back to you, Dan.
Yeah, and a question that arises to me is, how is this enforced, and how do we really know whether these numbers are being, whether people are kind of staying within the limits here?
Well, I am not the fisheries expert, so I cannot answer that question for you at the moment, but I can tell you that we are working very hard. The United States is very committed to better krill management. So the transparency and the data to be able to make sure that we are up to date on our understanding. So last year, the United States put forward 5 proposals, in fact, at the CAMLR meeting. So they have annual meetings of the CAMLR parties of the members every October. Last year, we put forward 5 proposals to improve the transparency and standards of the krill fisheries. So these proposals were co-sponsored by other members in the commission, including Australia, Korea, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. And let me just highlight some of the things we're trying to get through CAMLR to help with krill management. One of the proposals that we put forward was that all vessels carrying any Antarctic marine living resources, including krill or krill products, would undergo port inspections by contracting parties. Another one was that krill fishing vessels would be required to report their position in near real time to the CAMLR Secretariat via their automated satellite vessel monitoring systems. Another proposal that we are pushing is that krill fishing vessels would be required to carry on board at least one international observer appointed under the what they call CISO. It's the Scheme of International Scientific Observers. So there are observers on board, but we would like to have at least one of these to be an international observer. And one more highlight, members harvesting krill would be required to collect data relevant to the management of the fisheries, which would help us to address current data limitations in these fisheries.
Right.
I think we actually put these forward maybe a year before as well. We tried again this past year. We did get significant support among the members for these proposals. As was mentioned before, we need consensus at CAMLR. It's a consensus-based body. We will continue to work with the co-proponents and all members to try to advance these improvements at the next annual meeting, and as long as it takes.
Right. And when you talk the members fishing for krill, are there other non-members affected by these rules?
That's a good question. I don't believe that. Don't take my word for this, but my understanding is that nobody's fishing outside of the system. But right. We would have to get the expert. As I said, I'm not a fisheries expert. I'm here as the head of delegation. So.
And I appreciate that as well. You've obviously got an awful lot that you do have to know. So probably
exactly.
At the very least. But it does sound from what you're saying that the US is really pushing for some quite sensible amendments to the way this is managed that could just help to increase transparency and enforceability, I guess, of the limits that we're talking about. One of the things, we've only got a couple of minutes left, unfortunately, but one of the things that you've been talking about, that everyone's been talking about, is the Southern Ocean marine protected areas. Do you want to just kind of give me a quick wrap up of what their purpose is, what the role of the marine protected areas is?
Absolutely. And this is in the Antarctic portfolio, MPAs and better krill management under CAMLR. These are our priority issues, and has been mentioned before. We were a huge part of and proponents with New Zealand of the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area back in 2016 when that was designated. We continue to strongly support CAMLR's commitment to designate a representative system of MPAs in the Southern Ocean. As everyone on this call knows, I am sure the science clearly demonstrates that well-designed MPAs can provide substantial conservation benefits, including mitigating the effects of climate change. So establishing a system is important because there's substantial regional variability, even in the Southern Ocean, in the effects of climate change and the distributions of habitats and species and uses. So we aim to ensure that the conservation is comprehensive. And of course, CAMLR MPAs are important for reaching our global biodiversity target of conserving or protecting 30% of the global ocean by 2030. You know, we're going to need things on the high seas and MPAs in the high seas and MPAs within national jurisdiction to reach that. So CAMLR's first MPA was actually the South Orkney Islands in 2009. And then, as I mentioned, the United States and New Zealand were instrumental in the Ross Sea region MPA in 2016. This is approximately 2 million square kilometers. It's nearly twice the size of the state of Texas and is one of the world's largest MPAs. There are currently 4 MPA proposals under consideration by CAMLR. We just added a new one this past meeting. So East Antarctica, the Antarctic Peninsula, and 2 proposals in the Weddell Sea, Phase 1 and Phase 2. We're a sponsor of 2 of these and fully support the other 2. And we will absolutely continue to work hard with all CAMLR members to get these over the finish line. Back to you.
Great. Great. Well, that is really encouraging to hear, and in keeping with the theme of this whole discussion, it feels like there are so many smart people doing really good work to protect the ocean, and you know, the work into is that we just have to see for. So before we jump to the Q&A, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you'll stay for the Q&A as well. Before we get to the Q&A, I'd just like to have Doug jump back on. Doug Heskey, who's the co-CEO, or the CEO, sorry, of Newday, and he's going to talk with Matt Zimmerman about Newday's efforts in this area. So to take the stage for a second.
Dan, thank you very much. I want to express our extreme gratitude for everybody that participated in this call. Very worthwhile discussion, and certainly a lot of work to do from here. Before we move to a discussion with Matt, I want to touch on a couple of things. And I'd like to be very, very precise about the engagement and activation piece of this. And we have this philosophy inside our organization that we talk about all the time, particularly associated with some of these impact events that we do. And we always say to ourselves that if we leave this discussion and people say to us, well, that was interesting, then we failed. And we really need to go to the next level and talk about engagement in a really different way. And there are a number of core components. Some of them I referenced earlier on in this discussion. It's more than just education. And we need to find ways in terms of how we bridge this chasm between awareness and action, which are absolutely critical if we're going to move the needle on these important issues. So we talk about as an organization, not just as an institutional asset management organization, but as an asset management organization that is trying to turn the traditional impact investment construct on its head. And part of that is building what we identify as market-based solutions. Market-based solutions, in our mind, encompass what are 4 primary pillars for activation. It is addressing the public capital piece of this in public organizations that's measured by more than $160 trillion in global assets today. It's the investment of private capital into private organizations that allowed some of these very interesting and innovative technologies that will take us forward into this new millennium that allow us to build a better future for all of us. It is the charitable capital, which here in the US is more than $500 billion each year, that a lot of the nonprofit organizations that are on the call that we associate with today are so heavily dependent upon. But none of those things make any difference if we cannot foundationally address what is the individual and institutional behavior piece of this work. So when we talk about the Southern Oceans program that is linked into AHOY and the other investment management work that we do on the ocean health side, that's what we're talking about. It's not just about addressing capital deployment relative to these things, but getting people to behave differently relative to the things that we need we need for them to address to bring about long-lasting and enduring change. This program that we call Free Forever, in association with the work of the Cousteaus and Earth Echo International and a long list of other organizations, is critical. The program has been funded by Schmidt Marine Technology Partners, which we're incredibly grateful for. We are raising additional charitable capital in that program so that we can accelerate this work. And we are working very closely with an organization that I personally have an enormous amount of respect for, an organization by the name of the lexicon.org, which has been doing decades of work associated with sustainability and impact outcomes. The Lexicon, in partnership with Newday and all of these other organizations, are building what is an activator. And the purpose of the activator that will run over the course of the next couple of months is to build consensus decision-making among all of the community that is a part of the creation of MPAs and the protection of krill in the Southern Ocean, so that we at the end of 2024 can bring about what is a campaign to address consumer and institutional behavior. Part of that work is tied back to the work that Melissa Walton has done as you sow. It's corporate engagement activity tied to our impact partners. And we know that as a smaller impact organization, that when we go knock on the door of one of the major distributors for krill-based nutraceuticals, we get a lot more attention paid to us when we're doing that with Ashlyn and Philippe Cousteau, and doing it with Jane Goodall and other partners who are critical to the work that we do today. So I would encourage all of you, as we leave this conversation today, to think about your individual engagement or institutional engagement and how you can make a difference. It is funding or doing a deep analysis on where your public investment capital is currently going. It is giving consideration to making investments in some of these innovative technology companies that are doing this extraordinary work. It's contributing charitable capital to many of these same organizations that are in such dire demand for charitable capital. And it is changing the consumer behavior piece of this as well. I'd like to turn things over to Matt and back to Dan for a quick discussion on the work that we're doing inside of Ahoy. I think that most of you may know that we as an organization take a high percentage of our revenues and contribute those revenues back into the Oceans program that we support. That is fundamental to our philosophy as an organization, and we do that across our impact portfolios as well. Matt Zimmer is the portfolio manager for Ahoy and the other ocean health portfolios that we run. He is very well schooled in bottoms up and top down data collection associated with the work that goes on inside this portfolio. He is schooled in the area of governance, which is foundational to all of the work that we do here at Newday. So with that, Matt, I'd love to turn things back to you for quick discussion around what we're doing inside of Ahoy, and then some of the things that you think about relative to impact related to that portfolio as well.
Thanks, Doug. Well, we have yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to jump in. So we've got some good questions that we want to get to with the panel as well. So the other challenge that I'm going to present to you right now is to tell us pretty quickly about how Ahoy is put together and what its focus is.
Okay, I'll give you the quick elevator pitch here. So we've got a concentrated portfolio of international companies that we have 25 companies that are directly tied to ocean health in areas like green infrastructure, environmental engineering, water technology companies, and aquaculture and fisheries. And in addition to that, we have about 40% of our portfolio in companies that are doing good things for the environment, but in addition also have some negative aspects. And in this case, these are companies that are associated with the krill trade, which are companies that either produce or harvest or manufacture krill supplements. And so the idea of the portfolio is to use our shareholder position to advocate for changes in those companies that aren't doing what they should be doing as far as preserving the krill population.
That's great. That was a really good elevator pitch, actually. And anyone who's interested in learning more can obviously go to the website that's linked on the screen now. So there's a lot more information there, including the full portfolio constituents if you're curious about which companies we're actually talking about. There's full transparency on that on the website. So Matt, really appreciate your jumping in to share that with us. I'm going to use the last 5 minutes here to ask a couple of questions. One that is particularly pertinent for me personally is, what can individuals do to help move the needle on the MPA issue? Like, what can we as individuals do? And also, what can we do in terms of change in behavior, corporate behavior? So, Ashley, you're on my screen. You want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, you got it. I mean, number one, consumers, any of you on this call that are taking omega-3s, switch your omega-3s. Remember, fish and krill get their omega-3s by eating algae. So when we're taking krill or fish oil, it's not the primary source. It is an easy thing to do. The primary source is more absorbable. It won't have as many toxins in it, or really won't have any toxins in it. So please, number one, switch your supplements. Number two, you can talk to the retailers that you frequent. Actually, Whole Foods does not sell krill at all because it does not meet their sustainability goals. We have our sights set on people like Costco, Rite Aid, and CVS, all of whom sell krill oil. And then again, it gets a little bit more murky when we start talking about the aquaculture feed and the pet food industry. But again, remember, that three-pronged stool, 60% of the market value of krill being harvested from the Southern Ocean are just going to omega-3s here in North America. So as consumers, please just switch your supplements, talk to your friends and family. I mean, it is it's an $8 billion market, omega-3 supplements here just in the United States annually. So it is a huge market. If we can take some crunch out of that, we really feel like we can stop a lot of this fishing, or a lot of the want for fishing for krill specific down in the Southern Ocean.
Market's only growing into as well. We've seen evidence in Asia. So anybody else?
Exactly.
Any on that? The question this can do to contribute to ocean health in that sense. All right, silence. So another question, when thinking about the sort of challenges that we're facing in enforcing it, what can technology do to help us? I mean, I feel like that question is directed towards Philip. Can you?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that technology can do is, it's great to have an MPA, but the last thing you want to do is to turn it into a paper park. You have to enforce it. And the only two enforcement options you have is either a court of law or a court of public opinion. But one way or the other, you need evidence. Whether that's good enough for prosecution in court of law depends on where it is. If you're in international waters, good luck. Part of that is really just going to depend on making that case in the court of public opinion. So using technology available now, the satellites can tell you when illegal fishing fleets are turning up where they're not meant to be. Wave-powered buoy systems and autonomous vehicles with cameras and AIS detection and systems geared towards dark vessel detection can then give you video evidence of those specific vessels doing what they're not meant to be doing hundreds of miles off the nearest coastline. And then you have the things you can take and put onto, I don't use TikTok, but you can put it onto TikTok, I presume. You could use Instagram. You could put it on general social media channels. You could go through, printed media. That's what you need to do, because that's how you get the evidence of what happened off the Galapagos Islands, a couple of summers back. It requires the current technology to give you that snapshot, and it is available, because with that's how you put the pressure onto the bad actors.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a brilliant idea. And obviously in journalism, we've been using citizen journalism for years now, where you may not have a reporter in a particular area, but you may have hundreds of people with cell phone cameras that can actually show you what's going on. And that can be very effective. be the basis of misinformation, but handled intelligently can be a real something that really interesting thought in that sense. We have actually technically run out of time, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap this up. I'm very disappointed because I did have some other questions, but we'll find ways to keep this conversation going. Keep in touch with Newday. All for joining us, and thank you for spending some of your afternoon with us, or what it was in your time zone. But thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to Elizabeth for the conversation about the US government's efforts. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in and lending us their ears. So
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.